Hello and welcome to my student presentation class. My name is Juan Coronel and I will share with you some ideas about ID selectors versus class selectors and how do we use them when we apply CSS to our HTML document. Okay, so we are going to make a short review of the different categories that we have in selectors. And then we are going to take a closer view of class selectors and ID selectors. And finally, we will make a summary of these two selectors. Okay, so there are different categories when we want to define the different selectors that we have in CSS. This is just one category definition, but you can find more than one. So it's a matter of finding the information and classify the better way that we want. Okay, so to start we have simple selectors, which are name, ID, and class. Then we have combinator selectors, and the selection is based on the relation that you have between elements. We will see a few examples of this today. And then you have pseudo class selection. This selection is created to define a state of an element. For instance, a pseudo class selection is when you apply to hover or when you apply to focus. Then you have pseudo elements, and this selection is made to apply a style to a specific part of an element. And maybe to understand this selector, you can use pseudo elements to apply style, maybe to apply color or to apply font size, to maybe just the first letter of an element, maybe to a header or to a paragraph. And then you have attribute selectors, and this selector is created to apply style based on specific attributes or attribute values. What you do when you use attribute selectors, you have first of all create an attribute and then apply it through the selector to the HTML element that you are using. Okay, so let's start with a class selector. We are going to go from general to particular. This means that the class selector has a wider application than the ID selector. This doesn't mean that one is better than the other. This just means that when you use one selector, you can do some things, and when you select the other selector, you can do some other things. So okay, how works the class selector? First of all, on the HTML side, you have to apply a class attribute to the element. So on the example here, you have an h2 element that you are introducing a class, which is actually a name that says introduce product header. And then you have the header itself. So that's what you do on the HTML side. Now when you go to CSS, when you have to apply it, what you do is on your CSS file, you put a period, and then you apply the same title that you use for the header, and then you can apply all the CSS configuration that you want to apply. As I said, later we are going to see how this applies. Okay, so then you have the ID selector. So it's kind of the same as you do with the class selector. There are a few differences between these two selectors. The main difference is that when you use an ID selector, you can use this ID only to one element on your HTML document. That means that if you have the same ID on two different elements on your HTML document, it's not going to work. So as you use a class on the HTML element, on the ID, you have to insert the ID and then choose an ID that suits to what you're doing. On this case, on this heater, I'm applying an ID that is kind of the same to what I was doing on my HTML document. And how you apply it? So when you go to the CSS site, what you do is you write a hash character, you write the ID that it was selected on the HTML, and then you can apply the CSS configuration. So okay, so just to make a brief comparison, ID selectors, they are really good when you want to apply CSS to one specific element, and class selectors are interesting and are a good way to use when you want to apply CSS to more than one element. And actually, when you use a class selector, you can use class selectors, and you can also use ID elements. So here I have a few examples of what I was mentioning. Okay, so we can see here a few examples, as I said. Okay, we have here an H2 element that has a class introduce products header, and we have an ID, an H3 element with an ID console track header. These are names that I selected based on the information that I'm presenting, so I can relate the class and ID to the element that I'm creating. So when we go to the style, we can see here that we use this configuration when we want to apply a class, and we have a hashtag when we want to apply an ID. So this is what we see. This is the HTML document that the web page that was created using this class. So as I said before, when we are using class, we can use a class and ID on the same element. So if we go here, for instance, so I have created here I have created here a class that has a class console. So I'm going to apply this, and we are going to see if actually it works. Okay, so for instance, let's place color, I don't know, yellow. So we can see here that actually the color changed. So as I said before, you can have a class and you can have an ID on the same element. You cannot have an ID console track header here and place the same ID. It's not going to work. But you can have a class for more than one element. Actually, if we take a view here, if we can take a view that some of these classes that I have selected, they are applied to more than one element. So there are a lot of things to mention about classes, but this is just a short review. I hope it was useful, and I appreciate your time.